So I think tonight I want to start with recapping some of what happened or what we looked at the last few times, and then from there, I want to introduce to you the portion of the team that we already have now, and then I would like to spend some time and pray for them. I've been very blessed with the willingness. Not everyone that I asked agreed to, and good evening, welcome. Not everyone that I asked agreed to be a part of the team, but I think they all have good reasons as far as I know. And there's another one that is still, I have not heard from yet, so. But, that's kind of, from there we'll go into the word study and then on into, the objectives for tonight then. So, to recap some of what we talked about last time, does anyone remember the parameters of truth? Can anyone, I'd like them on too. Without looking. I said remember. That's right. That's right. So where are we with that? Is that hard for us to wrap our minds around? Are we getting it?
I'm having a hard time using it like knowing that I'm using this one. I figured out something easily.
Okay. So, you had mentioned this afternoon that you had observed that these are actually, we often use the parameters and the laws of logic without even realizing it. Some of them are almost instinctive. I would agree with that. But I think sometimes where we struggle is getting them in order. As if we reverse order them, they will no longer remain parameters of truth. They have to be given in that order. At least the three parameters of truth do. The laws of logic, I'm not sure that they necessarily have a specific order. So can we have some, does anyone remember the definitions? Can we have some definitions for, the first one is logical consistency. What is that? How do we use it? That's welcome. Has no one studied?
Well, if it's logically consistent, it's gonna be specifically in line with the laws of logic.
Okay. Which are?
The law of non-contradiction, the law of identity, and the law of the
And can you break those down for us? Or you can choose someone else to help you.
The law of excluded middle says that a statement is either true or it's not true, it's not somewhere in the middle. And the law of non-contradiction says it can't not be true, because it's not self-contradictory. And then the law of identity says it is what it is, if that is the case.
So, that's correct. The law of non-contradictory, to maybe make a little clearer definition for that, if something contradicts it, obviously is not true. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Okay, so let's go with the second one, empirical adequacy. Anyone want to expound on that?
That one is where we can observe with our senses whether we see or touch or taste or whatever that it's part of it.
It does mean that. Let's go back here to. So empirical itself means based on, concerned with, or verifiable by observation or experience, rather than theory or pure logic. So it definitely it can involve our senses. It also is something that we can verify through observation, by observing the past, something that happened in the past. It doesn't necessarily have to be something you touch, taste, or feel, or smell. Okay, and so what about the last one? Existential relevance. Is this hard for us?
Was this something that you sent over on this?
This was what we had.
This was last time, it was just a recap of last time.
First time. It was, well, it must be relevant to your time.
To our time, or to what? Like in conversation, to the subject, or to a question. It must be relevant to what is happening at that existing time. Does this make sense? Are we getting it? It's still a little cumbersome? Okay. Does anyone have questions about that? And if there is, please feel free to ask, because if you have a question about it, probably someone else does too. They just might not be willing to voice it. Okay, so the laws of logic, we kind of covered those with the parameters of truth. What are some things that can limit our ability to know truth?
Well, one, believing alone.
Pride.
What was that?
Pride.
Pride. That's right.
Or just being self-centered.
Sin?
Same.
Pessimism.
Did I miss that?
What did you say?
Optimism can too.
That's
That's right.
That's true.
No.
Are you challenging, Jesse? You care to explain?
Well, is optimism always unrealistic?
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
Well,
I
I know,
think-
but I mean, is it by definition unrealistic?
Well, pessimism isn't either.
Right.
Right.
The best definition of, or explanation of optimistic and negative, pessimistic, I ever heard was in a school meeting here in, was it here in Rosewood, I think, Wayne had the topic. He really brought up real well. His son had, came in with a toad, and his mother wanted to be optimistic. Look, Mom, look at this, yeah, ooh, it's cute, it's cute, it's cute, but she wasn't really. He said there's a difference between optimistic or realistic. She wasn't realistic. She was trying to. But then it was cute, just no, it wasn't.
Yeah, that's good. Anything else that you can think of?
Sin.
Yep. Same.
Cynicism. Is that a word?
So, I would prefer you would do this by memory. But if that means that no one said anything, then by all means look at your notebooks. I would much rather have you read it back to me than me having to tell you.
I wasn't looking at that.
Okay. Maybe I just thought I should clarify that.
Should you take
So why are words important?
just squeeze them together?
What's that?
Why are words important?
Does it help us express ourselves?
You can help us understand others who use words.
They help us to communicate clearly.
It takes care of a lot of frustration if we have words.
That's right. One thing that I think is well worth our time to think about is what Wayne shared with us about the people that have a struggle with cursing. Have oftentimes it stems from them being unable to express what they're going through, and so they resort. It's not an excuse, but sometimes we pride ourselves with having overcome something like cursing. But there's other ways that we negatively express ourselves for lack of being able to express what we're really going through at the time, besides cursing. And I think we would do well to spend some time to think about that. How can we best remember new words?
Using them.
Make them make sense to us.
That's right. Using them, getting to know them so that they make sense to us. And so obviously, we're struggling a little bit with that. I'm hoping that by the end of tonight, we'll have grown a little bit in that area. What is the number one question that should be really a part of our conversations in this group?
Is that
That's good. Maybe I need to restate that. Maybe it should be this, how is that true?
Or how do you know that?
Maybe, but how do you know that is, it makes it a little more personal, like a personal challenge, versus, I think what we're after is to simply learn by asking for clarification, asking for background, asking for thought process. And I think we need to be careful that we're not doing this that we're doing this with humility, that it can actually come across as something that, to where it's a atmosphere where all involved can learn. Okay. Is there anything else that stood out from the last two times that you would like to remind us of? And I'm actually expecting you to say something. Because if there isn't, then there's no point in having another evening.
I wasn't taking notes, so I should have been the first two times, or, yes. There was, I should have, I think it would have helped me to get it to stick a little better.
It does. At least for me it does.
So, try to at least get it a little more down this time. And
Sure. Anyone else?
Well, I do remember that the importance of asking the question in the right way.
That's good. Asking a question in the right way. Yes.
there was a, what's that?
Go ahead. No.
There was a statement made, that little video clip that you played, he, I can't remember the words he said, but anyway, the way he challenged, cynical or what was the other word?
Skeptic.
Skeptic, yeah, the skepticism, yeah, cynical or
Healthy skepticism.
Healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that stood out to me, which is basically what Jesse was saying.
Yeah. That really did a lot for me, I think, too. Were you?
Mom and Ryan. Mom had her hand up.
Oh.
Didn't
What,
see it.
what stood out to you, Lauren?
That we should speak meaningfully and recognize, the words that we are talking about, recognize the value behind the word. We value that becomes more easy for us to
Right.
remember.
That is really good. We should speak with meaning and purpose and recognize the value behind the words that we're speaking. I think it's quite important that if we look at the importance of words, it's very important that we realize the power of words and the weight of words, that we don't just throw them around lightly, that we actually use them with integrity and discretion, and that we use them most of all with love. So, with that, we do have 3 team members that I am excited to work with, and I would like to introduce them to you, and then I would like to gather around them and pray for them. And so that is Jesse and Susan and Jaleesa, and there's going to be another one coming. I don't know who he is yet because I'm waiting for an answer from a specific individual. But I want at least 4 people. We're very blessed to have the team join us, but I do want to emphasize that the team is not to take the place of your participation. Each one of you has something that I believe God has given you to add to this group. So again, just keep that in mind as we continue forward. We still want your input. We still want you to participate with the gifts that God has given you. And I believe that as we continue that God will also give added substance to our studies through each one of you. Okay, now to our words to study. Who all studied these words? Good. Good. So we all, my job's done then, huh? Okay, let's start with theology. So theology is the study of religious faith, practice, and experience, especially the study of God and of God's relation to the world. A theological theory or system. Does what did you find in your studies? What did you find as being how does it affect us? How do we use it? Do you have theology in your life, like in your belief system? Is there theology?
Can you repeat that definition again?
Okay, it's the study of religious faith, practice, and experience, especially the study of God and of God's relation to the world. And the definition number 2 is a theological theory or system. Sorry, I did not turn this back on for you, did I? There we go.
Well, I use it.
Okay. Go ahead. Speak up so we can hear.
Oh, I see. I use it when I have what I believe to be an idea at least, and it's growing, of the big picture of the nature of God and how it relates to creation and how we should, or what our responsibility is to Him, and how that we come in, how we get to know Him in a relationship.
That's good.
The definition that I came up with, another thing to add to that. It can be for different religions and different gods, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
But normally it's to figure out a way systematically, it's a systematical discussion of how we might best please God, whatever God that might be.
So it's a systematical discussion of what may best please God,
Right.
whichever God it may be. It's not specific to
Right.
a certain God.
But it has to be, it's not a philosophy, it's concluded already in
Okay.
the thing of, like, there is a God and there is morality. Like, 'cause
Mm.
it doesn't work unless you have that.
Okay, so it's not a philosophy. It is something that's already concluded. And can you repeat? The
I mean,
morality
it's-
of it is decided already.
Like, there has to be, like, you have to come to a basis of, okay, this is truth,
Mm-hmm.
to study theology, I mean, to do theology off of something, I mean, about something, like,
Mm.
You have to believe there is a God.
right, you have to believe there is a God and believe that there is, well, if your theology is about morality or whatever, sin or whatever it might be, you're gonna have to, I mean, that's gonna be in the, like, it's not saying, okay, there might be morality and there might not be.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, let's go on to philosophy. Philosophy is the most basic beliefs, concepts, and attitudes of an individual or group. Definition number 2. A pursuit or love of wisdom. A search for a general understanding of values and reality by chiefly speculative rather than observational means. An analysis of the grounds of and concepts expressing fundamental beliefs. And so something I'd like to add to that is when someone studies philosophy, they want to understand how and why people do certain things and how to, or specific things, and how to live a good life. In other words, they want to know the meaning of life. So rather than, this is not necessarily finding the meaning in God. So it can be, it's more of a general definition. So if we're talking about a pursuit or love of wisdom, it can be the definition of wisdom can be very wide. And along with that, I think it's well worth our time to look at godly wisdom versus worldly wisdom. So, for the Christian, obviously, we are obligated to go to use the biblical definition of wisdom, which is the fear. The Bible tells us that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. Whereas worldly wisdom can be based on, well, it's often based on relativism. It is often comes from, what Noah's definition of wisdom might be. It could be completely different from my definition of wisdom. It could be what he values is going to be the wisdom that he goes by. And I think because of that, we often get a negative, especially depending where we're coming from, we get a negative view of philosophy and theology. But particularly philosophy. The Bible tells us that we are not to be deceived through what is it, vain. At one point it says philosophy or vain deceit. The philosophies of men. There's different places it talks about that. I think it's worthy to note that this isn't necessarily saying. So we can't avoid philosophy if we are going to know truth. If we're going to know wisdom, we can't avoid it. It's something we already have, whether we put words to it or not. What we need to be grounded on is where our philosophy is based on. Where we're getting our definitions, where we're getting our, as was prayed tonight, that Jesus really becomes the truth. See, we can define what truth is, we can define what wisdom is, but until we find it in the person of Jesus Christ, it's still only definitions for us. It's still only, we need to stay focused as we go through this. I'm hoping that we don't lose sight of where we're actually going, because some of this may be a little bit of a tough for us to wade through, but we're actually going for a specific purpose and a specific place to end up. Is there any more definitions that you found, or clarity, or challenges to what I just said?
So, philosophy always starts from if you're philosophizing, whatever, you're coming from a position of, like, really doubting it,
Mm-hmm.
like
So more skeptic people.
radical skepticism.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would consider this, or my goal in this is more theology, not so much philosophy.
Can you explain that?
Well, because we believe in God,
Mm-hmm.
and we believe in Jesus
Mm-hmm.
as our salvation,
Mm-hmm.
and we believe in these things, and it's not, and we're seeking how to please Him and how to work in His kingdom. It's not like we're coming from a baseless, maybe I'm not getting it.
There's a question I have for you, and that is, have we established?
I knew you were gonna ask that.
Just say yes.
I think we do. I mean, like, there's no doubt in my mind. But,
Okay, are you willing to take the mic from here on?
no. I'm not saying I have it all figured out, well, certainly not. Or I wouldn't be here. But what I'm saying is, though, like, we're coming from that point of view.
Right. I understand what you're saying.
Can I add something to that?
Yes.
Well, philosophy would question everything, but theology would only question some things. It wouldn't question anything in the Bible that
Mhm.
would contradict that.
Okay.
This is,
So you're saying, obviously you can question stuff in the Bible through theology, right? But not as in the basic premises for God Himself. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
So, can we reach theology, how can I say this, without first, doesn't it take philosophy to reach theology? See, the one definition here says, the rational investigation of the truth and principles of being. So unless we do that, how can we reach theology?
Philosophy should lead us to theology,
Right.
if we are
That's fine.
honest,
Right.
right? Intellectually honest.
philosophy means to be on the way. Its questions are more essential than its answers, and every answer becomes a new question. So, it's,
Are we okay with questions?
yeah, I hope.
Good.
I'm not sure if I got the answer, but.
Good. That is how we
If I
grow.
know what questions to ask you.
That is how we grow. And I think more than anything, when we learn, our learning should teach us what questions to ask rather than simply giving us. I mean, yes, we do want to come to solid answers, but more than anything, my objective is that we learn to ask good questions. And yes, we as we ask good questions, we seek, and truth is knowable, and we find answers. But we are finite beings, and there will always be so much more for us to ask, and to learn, and to grow in, and to. And so if we come to a place where we no longer see the need to ask good questions, we've actually come to a place where we stop growing. And that is why philosophy to me is not negative. It does not have to be negative. If we actually if we are using, if we're going to the right sources to find answers to our questions, it does not have to be a negative word for us.
Another definition that I found is that philosophy is the way of thinking involves responsiveness, reflection, reason, and reevaluation. The aim is to deepen understanding.
Right.
And all of these words I've heard them before, but I really have very little idea of the usage of them. So
Right. Go ahead.
From what I had looked at a little bit, and things I've learned, generally philosophy is more, and that's how people use it. It is more where there really is no conclusion to it. The conclusion is your personal experience or how you see it. Where theology, you have more of something that's fenced in a little bit. But even theology is very scary for some people, because with my interaction with people, you have the Catholic theology, you have the Nazarene theology, you have Church of Christ theology, you can go on down the line, you have Baptist theology. Oh, they're all going through their theological seminaries, and now they know. And yet we find holes in all that. So my question would be, how can we make that different? How can we be pure in our theology? Can we be pure in it?
I believe we can be pure in it. Absolutely. How? Hopefully we'll find out.
okay.
Speak up.
No, I was just gonna say we can figure that out through philosophy.
Is that true? How is that true?
How is it true? Because philosophy is like they said, it is a thorough examination of your beliefs and like a reevaluation too, I think, a pursuit of wisdom. And I agree people who tend to use it open-ended, but I think that's where it's intellectually dishonest, where they are purposely excluding something that is true to further their own specific belief system instead of questioning it.
I agree with that.
So you're saying that you would see philosophy as more of a coming to more of a conclusion than theology?
No. But I think if we employ philosophy, we can use it as a tool to help us understand.
See, it's a tool that can be used or used properly or misused.
I
We
think
can use it to obtain truth, or attain truth, if truth is our goal.
I think I especially agree with the part of your statement where you mentioned that that often the reason that it is open-ended is because people use it to further their beliefs rather than
Right.
being intellectually honest with their studies.
I think we see philosophy being used a lot in a subjective way.
Right, and it's often connected with relativism because of that.
They're often trying to get rid of God.
Right. And they're often trying to actually, through their studies, twist it enough to support their own possibly theology, but whatever beliefs they're holding to. Okay, pragmatism. Pragmatism is a practical approach to problems and affairs, tried to strike a balance between principles and pragmatism. It's an American movement in philosophy founded by C.S. Peirce and William James and marked by the doctrines that the meaning of conceptions is to be sought in their practical bearings, that the function of thought is to guide action, and that truth is preeminently to be tested by the practical consequences of belief. Now that is definitely one of the more difficult definitions for me to wrap my brain around tonight. I apologize for this because I did not spend as much time as I should have to find definitions that are more relative to our studies. I'm hoping that some of you do. If you do, please speak up. But the basic breakdown of what pragmatism is it's a philosophy that bases on the standard of, if it works, it's true. So that's if you can't wrap your mind around the first two, and hopefully we'll have a little better definition coming from some of you, but that is the basic statement of pragmatism, is if it works, it's true.
It's practical instead of theoretical.
Okay. So, it's practical instead of theoretical. Okay. Do you have more of a definition than that?
Based on fact. And it goes, mindset, an approach that assesses the truth of meaning of theories or beliefs in terms of the success of their practical application, shall we dig deeper behind theories and find out what's practical about it and what's true in it.
Can or does pragmatism leave out the intervention of God? I'm just, from what I've seen, I'm just asking that question because it looks to me like it means, to be realistic and sensible from your understanding. And so my question would be, how does it leave it open for God to intervene in the way He sees it? Because it almost comes to the point, in a way, if you're like really pragmatic, you think you got it all figured out, and this is just the way it goes. It's a doing thing almost more.
Because it's working, so it's gotta be right.
Yeah, or you have certain elements of the truth that support what you're doing, so it has to be right, and it's not about realizing we have a higher being than our own understanding. That's kind of my scope.
I think that is fair to say. There is one thing that I want to be very clear about is that truth, although truth does include facts, there's a big difference between facts and truth. Because facts can be, you can have two facts, but put together they're not necessarily true. And in that way, I think pragmatism can often does not necessarily pass the laws of logic. So for instance, if it works, it's true. Is that even relevant to truth itself? I mean, truth, obviously it does work, because But we need something to work because it's true, not be true because it works. Does that make sense? And I think it's actually, in that sense, we may actually quite easily be drawn into pragmatism, simply from the standpoint that we want something to work. We want something, probably more than anything else, something that can easily become an idol to us is to succeed in life. And if it works for us, then it can be incredibly easy to bend the truth a little bit so that if it's working to help us to succeed, then it's very, very hard to see that it's not true. And in that way, it can easily become an idol.
Can you give an example of what you just said?
How blunt do you want me to be?
Or the other one where you said, you can have two facts and they may still not be true. Do you have any example you can think of, just to make it more real?
So,
I asked the question because I have ideas.
okay, go ahead. Well, by all means, speak out.
I mean, the two facts are you can have a paw and a tail. Those are two facts. But the truth is, what animal do you have? So that just because you have two facts
That is a
does not
very
mean
simple
you have the
definition.
truth. And then the other thing that you said, which I don't remember the words exactly, but if it works, talk about the pyramid sales marketing thing.
Mhm.
It works
Mhm.
for most people, therefore it must be true, and you are the loser if you don't become part of it.
Right, right,
But yet, when you look at the whole thing, there's a lot of idolatry associated with it.
right. Another example that is very relevant to us is, there's churches that have been around for maybe 1,500 years. Doesn't mean that they're any more true, just because they've worked for that long. And sometimes it would be good for us to question what is the definition of working as well. I mean, just because it exists doesn't mean that it's working. But anyway, so that's part of
I
where I was
think,
going
yeah,
with.
working should be defined too.
Okay. See how we're philosophizing here? And one question builds upon another, or it leads us to another. So right. That is a very good question to ask someone that is saying, well, it works, it's gotta be true. What is working about it? Is it existing? Or is it functioning? Is it functioning in its original intent? Or is it simply existing as a shell of what had been?
Or another question to that would be, what is the end result of the working?
Right. Because if it's a church that's not doing sound doctrine, the enemy doesn't care if everything goes well for them and exists for 1,500 years.
One question that I always have wanted to ask some of those people is, what about Paul's churches? Did they work or didn't they?
What are they Paul's churches?
The churches that Paul's, well, there we go again. Did God start? Never did Paul start. Okay, where are we going to end with this? but you get what I'm saying.
No.
How many of the churches that the apostles discipled are still going today? And yet we look at churches, we judge churches by how long they go. And we'd say, oh, it worked or didn't work. So I think, yeah, some of that is very good study to think about.
Well, the Catholic Church is, but they're very far from the original teaching,
Mm-hmm.
what the intent was when they started out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually why the Anabaptists and some of those split off.
Mm-hmm. The Reformation coming from that as well. So yeah.
But if we're seeking truth as God is truth,
Mm-hmm.
Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. If we're seeking truth like that, God says He will let the rain on the just and the unjust. And there's very successful businessmen,
Mm-hmm.
and I liked Roseberry, Glenn Roseberry. I mean, he was very successful.
Mm-hmm.
It was working.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're seeking truth if you're looking at truth as Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, it's not working.
Right. So, my conclusion is this, that just because something works does not make it a parameter of truth. That is not a safeguard or a safe way for us to judge if something is true or not. It might even look quite successful. And I think Glenn is that's a very good example of that. You know, he looked quite successful from the outside. It looked like he was working, God was blessing him, and he was diligent in material things. But it was not actually true. Okay, subjectivism, a theory that limits knowledge to subjective experience. A theory that stresses the subjective elements in experience. Number 2 is a doctrine that the supreme good is a realization of a subjective experience or feeling such as pleasure. A doctrine that individual feeling or apprehension is the ultimate criterion of the good and the right. So, I especially am looking at the second definition here, where it becomes some of these things may in themselves may not be quite as harmful until you actually build a doctrine upon them, and then if you examine them, they crumble quite easily. And so number 2 is especially something that I want to focus on a little bit here, because it's if we go back to the parameters of truth, if the supreme good is really the realization of an experience or feeling, think of where that could take us. Where would that put us? If the ultimate criteria of the good and the right is a feeling or apprehension, and the Bible tells us that that the heart of man is only evil continually. What kind of truth is that?
So, I mean, subjectivism, I can very plainly see where it's very harmful. I mean, if you accept it, you can't come to a understanding or conclusion of morality.
Mm-hmm.
But is there a good way in using this? Like, I mean, there's small examples of, personal experience where, there was, something that I experienced. But what's a good example of it actually of it being good?
So you're asking if there is a positive
Right.
to this?
Foods we like,
We should, whatever we eat or drink or whatever we do, we should do to the glory of God. So the ultimate, we eat to stay alive. So is that
Right, but you're still gonna judge your food if it's good or not by
Right.
By the taste of it.
by the taste of it. Yeah. That is
And that's better subjective because I love chocolate mint ice cream.
No,
good here.
but it's not good.
Well, yeah, of course it is.
Okay.
You must not be going by the feeling or the apprehension of it.
But, oh, yes, I am, but Jess doesn't. Okay, see?
Yeah, that is a really good.
So
Alright.
if subjectivism is, limiting it to subjective experience, would it be saying there are no objectives? Objective truth.
Right.
Wouldn't that be like refuting itself?
It is. It's self-defeating. That is why subjectivism can't stand.
Who's the guy that invented the word or started? Like,
I don't know.
I read his name today,
Find him.
and I wanted to ask if somebody knew him. I think
Des-
it was-
Des-
Find him and ask him what he was thinking.
Descartes is something.
Descartes, that's what it is.
Yeah,
Who is he?
Descartes came up with subjective thinking?
Descartes, yeah.
You're kidding.
I looked it up, yeah.
So what's about him, Jaleesa?
That's what I wanted to ask.
Like, how do you know him?
Oh, he was the one who came up with the theory that I think, therefore I am. That was Descartes.
That would sound like subjectivism,
French philosopher.
yeah.
What is
So was when
Oh
Thomas
boy, that's why I don't like algebra.
so when Thomas said he doesn't believe that Jesus rose from the dead, was he what was he going by? Was that subjective or what was
I'm not sure. Do any of you have an idea on that?
Because
What
it
was the
wasn't.
question?
Oh, when Thomas said he doesn't believe that Jesus rose from the dead, what did he? Was that subjectivism or what? What was that?
It was faith, most obviously,
You're
but
right.
Doubt.
doubt.
Because he wasn't saying that Jesus did rise because I believe he didn't, or I don't believe he didn't. He was simply saying, I don't believe it.
But he did say, I won't believe it unless I see it, unless I touch him. So he wanted, he was saying, I need personally to experience this before I'm going to believe it.
Mm.
So in a way that would sound like subjectivism. The theory that limits knowledge to your personal experience.
There's a different ism for that. What is it? Slips my mind now. But yeah, I think you're right. He was needing to experience it before he would be able to believe.
So what would now what out of what was Jesus talking when he said that blessed are those that believe even though they don't see? Is that theology or what? I mean the statement of how would you believe without seeing? What would you use to, obviously faith, but
So, do you think that Jesus was asking us to blindly just believe?
no. No, that's why I'm asking the question. What? Because I think that I probably understand the words a little bit more if I can if I can have ask a
Right.
question like that, and somebody
Right.
can tell me what
Right.
what he's doing there, or
Right.
what.
So, can any of your team members help me out on that?
Well, I think when Jesus said, "Blessed are they that believe," or that the one that don't see, he's probably referring to those that were going to believe
Like us.
through their word, like
Mhm.
us.
Wouldn't it be coming into the area of where the Bereans examined the scriptures, and they actually examined them for evidence of Jesus being the Messiah, and through that they believed. They were willing to search it out. They were willing to look for evidence, and they were willing to take the evidence they found.
Right, it wasn't just that he was the Messiah, but it was foretold that it was gonna happen this way.
Right. Right. And so I don't know if there's
He would,
a specific name for that, but I think,
Jesus had told them he was going to rise again.
right,
And
So you're saying they had already, they had their theology already, so now they're
In reality.
Yeah.
looking
they were willing to dig into their theology and to search it out and
to
to
see if
examine it, yeah. There's, I don't know if I've probably quoted this before, but there's a very wise saying that I think I just really enjoy. It goes like this: a life unexamined is a life not worth living. And I think it's very true. If we just blindly go through life basing on blind beliefs, and if we are not diligent in examining our lives continually to see whether or not our lives are actually measuring up to truth, then what is the point of us living? Their life becomes meaningless without truth. I want to continue here real quick. We'll hit relativism a little bit. A theory that knowledge is relative to the limited nature of the mind and the conditions of knowing. A view that ethical truth depends on the individuals and groups holding them. So relativism is a little more, it focuses a little more on the individuals or groups or cultures to define what is right and wrong versus just an individual feeling. But it's very, very similar. It's basically interchangeable. And it definitely has a lot of the same fallacies. Is there anything to that you want to add? Just in a quick way before we move on. Then I threw another word, a last word in there as well, just because I think it's a very easy word, and we might have a better understanding of it, but it's fundamental. And I think it's fundamental that we understand what this means so that we can get a grasp of what is true. It basically means serving as a basis, supporting existence, or determining essential structure or function. Serving as an original or generating source. So our fundamental beliefs are like the very basis for our belief of anything. And for us to be fundamentally, for something to be fundamentally true, it's like the very core of it is true. That is a word that we will come across quite frequently. I have avoided using it up to this time just because I didn't define but hopefully we will continue with that from here on out. So some of the objectives for tonight were to establish the importance of truth and why it is worth our time to continue focusing on it, to put into practice some of what we have been learning. And so we are running out of time. I'm going to try to cut it down a little bit, but I wasn't sure how long all this was going to take. So, the question, what is the single most important thing about the Bible? More than anything else, if it's this one thing, what would it be?
Let it be true.
Let it be true. Do you have a ready reason for that?
Well, if it isn't, then
We're most miserable of all creed.
That is right. Because we have no more meaning, we have no more morality, we have no foundation, we have no purpose. So this next section, I am going to make a whole bunch of truth claims, and I'm not sure what will happen, but you should feel free to challenge me at any point and to ask the most important question. But it may take up the rest of our evening, which is okay. So truth. Why is truth so important? Why is it so important that the Bible is true? Because if, like, for instance, it might be a book that works. If it weren't true, we could still use it as a book that works, and it definitely works like it says in there. Why is it important that it's true? And that question is very broad. It's very deep. But
give us purpose.
if, for instance, if it's not true, and it tells us how we came about, how humans came into existence, where is our origin? How did we even get here? What was the purpose of our being here? If, for instance, Jesus was not the answer for sin, what answer do we have for our fallen state? If, for instance, love is not the ultimate calling or sacrifice, then why would we chase our whole lives? Or not chase, maybe is not the right word, but why would we pursue love with all men? If it were not, why would we take the time to dedicate our lives to something that isn't true, that only works? Why not? What is the purpose of even gathering together to study? What is the purpose of us having any sort of pursuit of truth in any way? Why not just go meaninglessly through life? And what are the consequences of having a meaningless life? So, to begin with, without truth, there cannot be love. Now, an example of that, there can be compassion. Without truth, there can be compassion. But love is far deeper than compassion.
So, you've got a question on that.
Okay.
Jesus said, "Love not as this world loves." So what is he saying there? It almost seems like I agree with in John it says that we cannot love unless we're born of God. But then he also says that we shouldn't love as this world loves. Is there two different definitions of love? It would almost sound like it's
So obviously there is, there are many definitions of love, as far as if we want to get into that. But I'm specifically talking about, that's why I use the word compassion instead of just a lesser love. Because there's an example I want to give you, a story that Os Guinness shares.
What you see as you look at the American Republic is that the present crisis of truth has gone hand in hand with a crisis of character and a crisis of ethics. And together, these three are a very serious erosion of what was once considered essential to this nation. First, the crisis of character. Back in 1979 in Guatemala, a little town called Chahul, not very big in the world's map, the whole town was herded into the public square one day to witness the execution of 23 Marxist guerrillas who'd been captured by the Guatemalan army. And as the story went, they were stood up, and a soldier explained to the crowd how each of the hideous wounds had been given. Another soldier took a pair of scissors and cut all their clothes off and left them naked. And then other soldiers came and bludgeoned them with bayonets to the ground, poured kerosene over them, and they were burnt alive, writhing hideously till they died. All over Europe in the 13 years following that, the sister of a 16-year-old who was one of them told the story in conferences and all sorts of packed audiences, and usually ending with an incredibly dramatic crisis, and the spotlight would be on her alone, and many people would be in tears. And the red carpet was rolled out, the Pope invited her, royal heads of state invited her, and then in 1992, to climax it all, she was given the Nobel Prize over Václav Havel and various people who were also candidates that same year. 1992, 500 years on from Christopher Columbus, how extraordinarily appropriate that a young native Mayan Indian woman should be given the Nobel Peace Prize, standing up for the truth of her people. But then one of her supporters, an anthropology professor, investigated it, and in his words, decided, after looking at the facts, she should have been given the Nobel Prize for fiction, not peace, because much of the story was concocted. Much of it was true. Now her parents had been killed by the police, her brother had been killed by the army, but not in that way. No one had actually been burnt alive in the town square in Chahul. Now, when the professor said this, a firestorm of outrage came on him. He was imposing his Western journalistic views of veracity on this Native American woman who's lived in a different world. And after all, she was expressing the larger truth of her people. She had the victim's right to lie. You name it, it went on. A left-wing example, undoubtedly. And you can find examples across the board today, left, right, and center, of what's now loosely called creative invention or creative reinvention. And you can see when it comes to character today, how in the last 100 years there's been a profound sea change in American culture. Truth is dead, character is dead, and we can create whatever image we want for ourselves.
Did you get the story?
I think so.
So do you see how compassion is different from love, and how love builds on truth? See, where was compassion with the professor that pointed out truth? But what would love have done? If love is defined by truth, then real love would actually love the man that brought the truth, rather than having compassion for no real cause, having compassion on a lady that was spinning fiction. Does that make sense? There's also a second reason I showed you that video, and that is that do you see how important it is for us to be able to examine something and to understand if it's true or not? To know if it's true or not. See, what would have happened? See, there's another thing that happened that year, or with what went on there. Someone was worthy of winning the Nobel Peace Prize, possibly. It was obviously not her. But look what she stole from that person, whoever it was. Now, we believe that we shouldn't do things for recognition, which is fine. But still, back to, was this innocent or wasn't it? There was honor given to her that was not due. And so, what would have happened if there would have been no one able to actually check it out and to know if it's true or not? And how often are we in situations like that, where it does affect lives, when we don't, when we are not able to understand if a story is true, or one person is saying, what one person is saying is true, or if what another person is saying is true? Do you see how, because of that, people have been put in prison for life? People have been executed because of an inability to understand and know what is true, an inability to divide or to decide which story was actually the real story. And
You see, automatically, you don't really have any source of finding the truth. You automatically take a side, one side or the other, and it's not fair.
we do. It very quickly becomes relativism and subjectivism, because we go by feeling rather than rather than the parameters of truth. And that is why it's so important for me that we actually take the time to wade through some of this and to understand this before we go on. Because it is just as important for us to be able to examine whatever we perceive as truth as we go through life, as it is, even though it may not directly affect another person for life, it will affect you. And how you live your life and what you believe will affect others. And in that way, it does affect others. Truth eliminates the need to cop out when much is at stake. So what if that person that had checked that out, that professor, would have been not 100% sure that it was true what he was saying? Look at how easy it would have been to just cop out and say, well, let her have her story. What do we do when someone's life, someone's reputation, someone's is on the line? See how easily we cop out and say we don't take sides. But what if there is a real story? What if there is truth? And if we are able to know that truth, it will give us the courage to speak up and to actually reach out and to lift up our voice and to say and to speak out the truth and why it is true. Without truth, there cannot be justice. Without truth, there is only fear.
That
Right.
truth eliminates the need to cop out. That's not an absolute statement,
Okay,
is it?
go ahead.
I was supposed to ask that. No, I mean, I think there is still needs to cop out.
You still think there's a need to cop out?
I mean, there might be a legitimate reason to cop out.
Go ahead, I'm listening.
That's what I said. I'm saying there might be a
Are you
legitimate
copping out?
reason to cop out.
You mind giving a reason for copping out?
No, I mean, you don't think there's ever a legitimate reason to cop out just because of the truth. I'm not saying quit in a situation where you should keep going, but there might
So-
be a reason to quit.
So define cop out, I guess. Maybe that's where we're differing, because
I think it is.
it doesn't mean that we say everything we know. Just because you know truth doesn't mean that you just have to incessantly be spewing it out.
Right.
So like Jesus,
But
he was.
it takes away our need to simply step down from a situation where we really need to be there.
Right, where we really need to be there. Right.
So when Jesus was quiet, when they asked him questions, you know, at the trial, or when they set things against him, was he copping out, or was there no reason for him to speak?
Most certainly he was not copping out.
Right,
Jesus did not live without intention.
right.
I think when you go, truth eliminates the need to cop out because much is at stake.
That's good. I'll take that. See why words matter?
I'm just being picky.
You have that right, or that privilege. So, without truth, there is only fear. 2 Kings 6:11-19. The story about Elijah and the servant. Look at the difference it made in that servant's life when he saw the truth and who was true. I'm going to continue skipping over it real quickly, but just it's a story of where the city was surrounded and the king of Syria was looking for Elijah and his servant specifically because they had God was showing them information, and the servant was the servant was completely freaking out because of fear of all, like their lives were in danger. And Elijah prayed, and the servant's eyes were open, and he saw all the chariots of the fire of the Lord on the mountains. And when his eyes were open, he saw the truth of who God is and where he is in this situation. The fear left. And that is a very good example of what happens in our lives when we embrace truth. Here's another truth claim. Without truth, there is only manipulation. That would be worth it to explore. Without truth, there's only dictatorship. And Hitler is a very good example of that. Without truth, there is no purpose. Jeremiah 29:11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and an expected end." Truth is more than an idea. So it's not just an ideology. truth is more than escaping judgment. Look that up real quick. Revelations 21, verse 8. Says, it's speaking specifically that all liars will have a part in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone. So truth is more than just something that we embrace to keep from going to hell. More than to set the captives free, Isaiah 58. So Jesus said that ye shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free. And Isaiah 58 tells us to set the captives free. We can't walk into prisons and just open the doors and let everyone out. But we can bring truth. But truth has even more purpose than just that. Truth is more than facts. And we talked about that a little bit earlier. How truth, see, facts can be arranged in any, you can bring two facts together and you don't necessarily have truth. It's more than a standard to live by. Truth, more than anything else, can change our actions. If truth is our moral law, Proverbs 23:7 says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. So it's important what we have in our hearts. Do we have truth? Do we know truth? And if we do, it will change who we are and what we do. Truth can change our thoughts toward our beginnings. Let me just go back to that previous one. Truth more than anything else can change our actions. See, truth is more also, so again we go back, it's more than a standard to live by. And what I'm saying there is truth, see, if it's just a standard to live by, we know that it's sin to rape a woman. We know that's sin. Truth is more than that. It changes our lives. It changes our life by us realizing the value of a creation of God. The value of that woman as God's creation. And the weight and the value that God puts on that specific human being. And how our actions will affect another human being. And when we see that, when we see truth in that context, it will not only keep us to the letter of the law, but it will take away the desire. Do you understand what I'm saying? It changes who we are in our hearts. See, we have no problem with having thoughts about killing a baby. I mean, with not having, we don't struggle to think about just killing an innocent little child that runs up to us laughing. Because to us, we see the consequences to that child. We see the terribleness. But what if we would see that? What if we would see the consequences of us lusting after a woman? See, truth is much greater than just a law. It affects who we are in our hearts. Truth can change our thoughts toward our beginning. An example is Psalms 139:13. For you formed my inward parts, you knitted me together in my mother's womb. So it was God that had his thoughts towards us when he began to make us. And it is for that reason that we can read Jeremiah 29:11 and realize that it is not for our purpose that He created us. It is for His purpose. And when he talks about an expected end, it is because He has already an end goal for us, an end purpose. And as He knit us together in our mother's womb, that is the plans He has for us. It's not just some glorious health and wealth plan that will make us feel good and will be subjective. It is an actual, there's a purpose that He has, there's a greater purpose, a greater picture that He has created us to contribute to with the gifts that He gave us. So truth changes our thoughts towards our beginning. I praise You, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are Your works. My soul knows it very well. Truth can change our existence and our being. John 8:31, which is, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free, if you abide in my word. Truth can change our destiny. John 14, verse 6. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh to the Father but through me. So if we are to be reconciled to the Father, it is through truth that we come to that. In essence, I believe it is fair to say that truth is life itself. Without truth, there is no meaning. There is no purpose. There was no reason for your existence in the first place. And I hope that if there was anything tonight that you take away, it's this little sentence here. The story of your life was not so much about God's plan for your life as it is about your life for God's plan. And that is why I think it's worth our time to gather together here. That is why I think that is the only reason that I think it's even closely logical for me to attempt to have this, to lead this, because it is not my story. It's God's story. And our purpose for our creation, for being created, was to contribute to His story and to His plan. And look at how that deals with insecurity. Because all of a sudden, it's not about you anymore. It's not about you fulfilling your purpose. It's about you fulfilling God's purpose. And that's something that I'm learning right now, I think. So again, we have more evenings coming up, so we'll just stop once it gets to the time. Keep going here. Why is it, we're back to the question, why isn't it okay to simply believe that the Bible is a good book to go by? And it has to do with our worldviews. Our worldview is formed by 5 things. Specifically 4, but I believe there's also a 5th. That's origin, identity, meaning, morality, and destiny. Origin has to do with chance versus divine intent. If our worldview, see how we view our origin. Look at the difference between us being randomly here through chance and God knitting us together in our mother's womb. See how truth changes our existence and our beginnings. Identity. Whose image is on you? See, we are not here randomly with the features that we have. We are made in the image of one that is the ultimate truth. And it is His truth that He wants to purify in us. Meaning, purpose, value. If our origin is by divine intent, look at the purpose and the value that that places on each person. Morality, right versus wrong. Justice. Where do we get our morality from? Without morality, what world would we live in? Without someone or something to say, to rise up and to cry out and to say that a murder of an innocent life is wrong. Think of what that world would look like. Destiny, eternity, everlasting existence. Does the Bible sufficiently answer these for us? And if it doesn't, what is the alternative? Without divine intent, we are unplanned. We're here by chance. As the atheists and the scientists of today want to say, we're only a blip on the radar screen of time. That directly affects our purpose and it affects our value. With no purpose and no value, how can we come to morality? If you do not have purpose and you don't have value, there is no meaning to life. Then who is to say that it is wrong for me to simply eliminate you out of my life? And destiny. If the Bible does not sufficiently answer, then destiny is not even something that is real. Where we end up is the grave, and this is it. These are far too important questions to take the chance of being wrong on the answers. Is it good enough that the Bible is a good book that works? Or do we want to know whether or not it's true? Do we need to know? Is there a driving force, a passion for truth that would make it worth our while to find out if it's true or not? There's one more video I want to show you, and then I'll quit for tonight. This is again by Os Guinness. He also does a lot with Ravi.
Secondly, let me move on to two arguments to people who actually do believe in truth, mostly, but are very careless about it, which is, on the one hand, many believers, and on the other hand, many citizens. Let me address two arguments to the believers first. There's a lower and a higher argument for truth. The lower argument for people who are believers and should be committed to truth is that unless there is truth in faith, faith is always vulnerable to the charge of either bad faith or poor and inadequate faith. Bad faith, particularly in the way, say, the French existentialists put it, is people who believe, say, in God, only because they're afraid of the alternative. They're afraid of the terror of meaninglessness or whatever. So, because of fear of the alternative, they believe in God. There are many answers to that profound objection to faith, but the deepest of them is simply no believer should believe because they're afraid of the alternative. That may make them think and care and search. But fundamentally, there's only one final adequate reason to believe, because one is convinced that it is true. How about poor faith? There are many people in this country I've met who have extraordinary inadequate views of faith. They believe because it's true for them, which is relativism. Or they believe because they felt it and experienced it very deeply, which is subjectivism. Or they believe because, quote, it works for them, which is basically pragmatism. But for followers of Jesus, those are three fundamentally inadequate views. We do not believe relativism or pragmatism or subjectivism. The Christian faith, for example, is not true because it works. It works because it's true. And people who have that inadequate faith, very often it's because of bad teaching. Sometimes they use that lack of reason as a drawbridge to raise the portcullis against skepticism and questions and objections. In other words, as a way of escape, which is fundamentally dishonest. And once again, there's no answer either to bad faith or to poor versions of the faith without the notion of truth. But that's the lower reason for believers. The higher reason is that for both Jews and for Christians, and they would be exactly one here, the ultimate reason to believe in truth is not fancy philosophy, but solid theology. In other words, in the biblical family of faiths, unlike the secularist family or the Eastern family, truth is central to faith. Because God himself is the true one. He who is a personal, infinite God is the true one. And he speaks truly, and he acts truly, and his words and deeds can be checked out in history. And so the notion of trustworthiness and truthfulness are very closely linked. And ultimately, truth, for both Jews and followers of Jesus, is finally a matter of who God is.
So, I made a lot of statements. I haven't heard very many "how is that true?" But it's time to quit. You have the option of either staying informally or else writing it down for next time.
You're not copying out.
I'm not copying out. Our outline for next time, I'm going to continue again, a lot of this is simply a lot of guesstimation as far as how much time something's gonna take. But specifically, I would like for you to study more in depth. I was a little disappointed with how robust you responded to what the parameters of truth are. And next time, I'm hoping to hear a little more. So spend some time, familiarize yourself with that, and then we'll actually get to use it in the next sessions. I wasn't sure how much, but I think we can spend that. I want to actually spend an evening just simply. I've got some truth claims, and I've got a parable that I want to unravel, and so the next session I plan to simply have is purely interactive.